Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Tonight's story, In the Bayou, by Nihilist. If you want to understand why I left the place I was at, you're really just going to have to hear the entire story. You won't believe it, of course, but your skepticism really doesn't mean anything, because what I saw that night on the bayou has been with me ever since. In my mind, in my thoughts, sometimes even in my dreams. It exists as a disturbing memory I can't shake away. That will never go away just so long as I live. It'll be one of those things so terrifying that it'll still be just as keen in my mind on my deathbed as it was the day it happened. But whether or not you believe me, I'll tell it to you anyway. If only to serve as a warning, a plea for caution if you ever find yourself near the swamps late at night. At the time, I was working at a shitty little fast food place. The only thing worse than working at a shitty fast food place is working at a shitty fast food place on the night shift by yourself without a vehicle. Especially when you just so happen to live in the heart of rural Louisiana. Such was my case some years ago, the night this event happened to me. During this time, I lived quite a few miles away from the restaurant that I worked at, and due to my lack of a vehicle or any access to a public bus system, I was dependent on others for my transportation to and from work. One night, after a busy evening of serving customers, I closed the store and locked up the restaurant. When I phoned for my ride, nobody answered. Now, I'm not here to throw a pity party, but I can't help but express the anger I had at the fact that this person who drove me to and fro from work was my roommate, who had a car, but no fucking job. And I was basically the only person in our house who paid the rent at this time. And this loser had the carelessness to fall asleep, leaving me with no fucking option but to walk again. See, this was not the first time this had happened. The first time it took me an hour and a half to get home, walking briskly. And to those of you who've never been in the rural regions of Louisiana, trust me, you have no clue. Here, we have what's called a bayou. It's basically swamp. Thick, murky, moist, frog-laden, mosquito-swarming, gator-infested, crappy-smelling swamp. With thick, tall grass, cattails, cypress trees, and heaves of pond scum. And I just so happened to live on the bayou, all the way down a long dirt road with hardly any streetlights and thick swamp on both sides of the road. There are no side roads, and the houses down this street are separated sometimes by more than a quarter mile. It's not merely spooky walking down this road at night. It's fucking terrifying. You hear sounds, both real and imagined, coming from the bayou. Chirping, creaking, howling, grunting animals. The rustling of leaves and branches in the canopy of the cypress trees, and the splashing water from underneath. That's the worst. You can hear the sound of something lurking nearby abruptly dunk underwater. This can be a turtle, a snake, or an alligator. You never know. You just have to keep walking, your teeth and hands clenched tight, hoping nothing crawls through the tall grass next to you and onto that road. Or, even worse than the subtle dunking sounds, the sudden splashes that happen when you're walking and you scare a toad or a frog and it jumps into the water. That sound makes you almost shit yourself as you begin a running spree that lasts about 3 seconds before you realize what it was. And then you're left with your heart pounding so hard the sounds of your blood gushing in your temples scares you almost as much. These are the types of things that happen when you're in the bayou. This is what I had to look forward to that night as my asshole roommate slept sprawled out on the sofa with the television set probably tuned into reruns of the Three Stooges or the Marx Brothers. And don't get the impression that I simply called once and then gave up. You can trust that his cell had around 7 or so missed calls, 3 very unfriendly voicemails, and several aggressively angry text messages. I could just imagine his phone lying in another room of the house, softly vibrating in my desperate attempts to reach him as he snored. But eventually I gave up, and having just about no other friends to contact in the area as a recourse, I stopped by the nearby gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and began my way home. Now, you have to understand, the first 30 or so minutes of my walk really isn't that bad. I'm still in the most populated part of town, and there are streetlights, stores, houses, and cars passing by in large numbers. That's important. If there are a lot of cars going by, you feel safer than when there are very few cars going by. Because when there are only 1 or 2 cars that pass you every 3 to 5 minutes, that means there could be a psychopath in one of those cars, and they may have enough time to stop by and murder you without being caught. But if there are a lot of cars around, a lot of people around, there may be a psychopath passing by, but they'll most likely not kill you because there are too many people, and someone might witness the crime. At least, that's my reasoning. But I digress. No psychopaths pulled up next to me as I walked in this part of town. Next, there comes a time in my journey where I have to turn down several suburban neighborhoods and walk some streets to get where I'm going. And here's where things get a little less safe, and I have to be a little more cautious. There's less traffic down these roads, and you never know when some punk or some gang may be hanging out in some empty lot or house. These folks might mess with you, or try and pick a fight, or mug you, or just take an empty bottle of malt liquor and bash your skull in. You know, initiation ritual, something like that. These are the thoughts that go through my head as I walk this region, and they keep me on my toes, until I reach the point where the houses become fewer and fewer, and the bayou actually begins. This is where the dirt road leading to my home is, and it's where I found myself on this night, on foot. Look down the narrow road. Now you can only see so far before it fades into misty darkness. I resented that I'd have to spend the next hour walking its distance until I reached my house, but anger took hold of fear when I thought about how all of this could have been spared if not for the neglect and carelessness of my roommate. When I got home, I was really going to have it in for him. I truly considered, at that time, the possibility of physically smacking his damned face. And with this thought firmly entrenched in my mind, I launched defiantly down the road, and the further I walked, the darker it became, until no light shined but the stars and a sliver of moon above me, and very soon the sound of any vehicle was completely non-existent. There was just me, the road, and the bayou, and whatever creatures dwelt there. I heard the crickets chirp, and the frogs croak, and the occasional bird coo. To avoid getting scared, I focused on their chorus, and I let the sounds preoccupy my mind. I walked, watching my shoes press into the sandy dirt as I placed one foot in front of the other. I'd count my steps until I reached 100, and then I'd begin again. And I tried to lose myself in the repetition. My shoes became damper and damper, and I felt the soles of my feet become moist. I stopped counting to ponder whether I should smack my roommate with a wet sock, but my thought was interrupted when I glanced up for a moment and saw that I was not alone on this road. A sharp panic started to seize my heart, and I became very, very nervous. A long distance up ahead of me, I could discern the soft silhouette of what I thought was a human figure. It was so far away that I couldn't tell whether it was moving ahead or back in my direction. If I froze, I could feel the blood gushing in my temples. What were the chances of there being some malicious punk wandering this street at night looking to rob me or pick a fight? Well, that was the most reassuring thought I had as I tried to convince myself that I was still safe. I tried to keep calm, not let my nerves get the best of me. I mean, whoever this was probably just as frightened of the prospects of me as I was of them. If they'd already detected me, that is. I didn't know what to do. Run? Well, there were only two directions. Continue walking? What were the risks? As I stood there, I saw that the figure was indeed moving toward me, and its form was becoming more defined. And this was the time I began to notice how awkwardly it was moving. The figure didn't walk normally. It didn't bob up and down like how a person looks as they walk. What was coming towards me, it would seem from my perspective, moved in short, quick, jerking movements, and I could see from what light was present how its twitchy limbs projected from its torso, and how it was getting closer, and how its head stuck out from a neck that was longer than any human neck should be, and how at this time I could now faintly hear the noises that it seemed to make, the sound of suckling. And now it was moving quicker, and how its face lifted, and I could see its eyes glare like glowing yellow beads, and how these wide, beady eyes locked right onto me, staring right at me, and how it stopped. And how we both were there, motionless, yards away, looking at each other. And how it let out the most ungodly, inhuman screech I've ever heard, like a pig being gutted. It squealed violently, and the sound resounded through the bayou, and the chirping and the croaking of the crickets and the frogs stopped. Everything stopped. And the rumbling and humming was all that could be heard afterwards. The rumbling and the humming of a motor ahead. A vehicle speeding towards us, tires racing loudly. The thing in front of me hunched over and turned to see the headlights beaming our way. It hissed, getting down on all fours, only pausing for a moment to turn back towards me, gawking at me with those wide eyes before crawling off hastily into the swamp. The vehicle that scared the thing away was my roommate's car. He never saw it, of course. Whatever it was. And I never wanted to see it again. I moved as soon as I could, and I haven't gone back there since. So stay scary, my wildlings. Stay strapped, and make the most of your nights.